In this Baldur's Gate 3 video, we'll be covering Patch 4 and Patch 4 notes. I'll be covering the big highlights, the things I think are most important. I won't be going through all of these because, again, there's like another 1,000 or so changes that they've added to the game. They're getting one of these patches out about once every month, which is a pretty good rate at the size of the patches that are here. So I think this game is going to be absolutely polished to hell by the next, 6 months or so. They keep going the way they are going. So the first thing I want to mention is something that I think, is really important to players, which is that the performance optimization of the game continues to improve. They're working on improving performance, it looks like, particularly in Act 3, which I think is where the game has most, if any, of its performance problems, particularly in highly populated areas where there's a lot of effects and a lot of characters on the screen. So they've been working on this. Hopefully this is better than it was before, and I'm glad that this is something that they're continuing to do besides all the other changes that they're doing. And hopefully that means performance of this game will just continue to improve throughout their patches. Now, moving on to the other nitty-gritty details of the patch, one of the things that is a highlight here is that you can now customize your hirelings' appearance when you recruit them. So for anyone who's, using hirelings to make their party exactly how they want, fully customized, etc., you can now change the appearance of your hirelings so you can make them look how you want, which is a nice change. Another change is that ArchFey Warlocks now get a choice of Cantrip at level 4 as intended. Apparently, they were not getting one, so now they get one at level 4. So if you're playing an ArchFey Warlock, that's a good change for you. Now, another really big change, in my opinion, this is a pretty big one, although it probably won't affect the majority of players, is a change to Clerics. There were several subclasses of Cleric that didn't get a subclass benefit at level 6 that now do. Knowledge Domain Clerics now get Channel Divinity Read Thoughts, which is really strong in my opinion. Nature Domain Clerics will now correctly gain Dampen Elements at level 6, and Trickery Domain Clerics will now gain Channel Divinity Cloak of Shadows, allowing them to go invisible. So if you were playing a Cleric in one of these 3 classes, or you were avoiding these 3 classes of Cleric because they didn't get a subclass benefit at these levels, I urge you to check them out now. Another change that I particularly like is that they improved the skills section of the character sheet, so now they have icons for the skills, and they have stars to indicate proficiency and expertise in certain skills. So it's a lot easier to see and kind of understand. Skills in this game just generally, from a UI perspective, have never looked that great, and I think this is a step in the right direction. I would love to see them do something like this for character creation or when you're respecing your character as well. Another change that I really like is that combat rounds are now displayed under separate headings in the combat log, so it's easier to distinguish, when things happen because you're going to break it down by round. So if it happened this round, you'll find it sooner, and, there'll be a delineation between rounds, making it easier to scroll up your combat log and see what happened. Not everyone really does this. As me, someone who does a lot of build testing and theory crafting, etc., it's very easy for me to go find the things I need now with this change. Another change is they fixed an issue when you assaulted someone while you're invisible that would cause a guard to spot you and start a dialogue if there was a civilian nearby. So I'm assuming now, I haven't tested this out, but it's working correctly while you're invisible and things happen, nobody's seeing you do them. Another buff is that the Rage Tiger Heart action of the, Wild Heart Barbarian that chose Tiger Heart now gets an improvement to rage damage at higher levels. Apparently it wasn't getting that, so that's a good, obviously, bug fix. Another good change here is that while dual wielding, swapping a weapon to a different slot no longer removes all conditions applied by the weapon's passive features. I know there were a lot of people complaining about this bug. I've seen this complained about a lot. This is a good one to get fixed. And then another change, they added new moments for which a paladin will break their oath, like torturing a prisoner, or killing a pixie after helping her, or burying someone alive, breaking someone's legs. Apparently there were a lot of moments that should break your oath as a paladin that were not triggering it, so they've worked to improve this so that it should now. And then for some things that are kind of nerfs, in my opinion. First of all, they've made it so that your dexterity modifier is not added to your ranged offhand damage before you have the dual wielder feat. So if you're using hand crossbows, your dexterity won't be added to your ranged offhand damage by default anymore. Another change here, this is probably a correct change even though it is a bit of a nerf, is that when you use a spell to make first strike to initiate combat within 6 seconds of real time before the combat begins, you'll now have, the appropriate number of resources deducted. So this would typically be an action for most spellcasters unless you're like a sorcerer, something like that. So if you lead off with I don't know, you're a warlock and you lead off with Eldritch Blast, this should now, when combat triggers, you should have already had your action for that round. And another change is the mask of the Shapeshifter item no longer makes it seem like you're really a member of the target fantasy race. Instead, you're just, pretending to be it. So the interactions with characters should reflect that now. They also made it so that sneak attack applying to spells in certain situations is now fixed. This is kind of a shame in my opinion, because I was kind of toying with the idea of doing like a spellcaster that could trigger sneak attack damage with ranged spell attacks, but that seems to have been patched out of the game, and ranged spell attacks don't seem to do sneak attack damage. I haven't tested it with every ranged attack spell, but I did test it with Guiding Bolt, and I did test it with Eldritch Blast, and it no longer triggers sneak attack with either of those spells. And lastly, they fixed an issue where enemies were overvaluing the blind condition so much that sometimes they just wouldn't do anything. So if you blinded them, sometimes they would just stand there and do nothing. So hopefully the AI, gets better at what it's doing. This is kind of a nerf, but it's also kind of a buff because, frankly, it's not interesting when the AI just stand there and do nothing. So those are kind of the high points for me. There are a lot of story-related patches and bug fixes and changes the flow of the story. Obviously, these aren't like monumental or something, doesn't like overhaul the story, but there are a lot of fixes like that in there that I didn't mention for spoiler reasons for people that haven't played the game. I urge you to read through the rest of the patch notes if you want to see everything. Obviously avoid that if you haven't finished the game and you're avoiding spoilers. But Larian continues to do a great job of patching this game. Clearly there is a lot of love and passion put into this project, and the rate that they're continuing to patch these things is incredible. And another thing I find incredible is that there's so many things being patched, and yet the game plays like a polished product. Most of this stuff you don't even notice if you're playing the game unless you're like a die-hard player and you've done a lot of testing. So it's really incredible that there's so much things that they're able to tinker with and improve without you really noticing that it's happening. So that wraps up our patch 4 video. I hope you guys kind of got the highlight points. Again, if you want to see everything, you can read through it here or on the wiki. I want to mention too that we are giving the wiki an overhaul. We are revamping the tooltips for all spells, class actions, and weapons and armor and stuff like that to make them look just like the game as much as possible. And we're just kind of giving the site and, the wiki itself a big overhaul. So if you haven't been in a while, I urge you to check it out.
I feel your breath upon my neck, a soft caress as cold as death. I didn't know you well back then. I blame it on all luck and pain. Your blood like wine, I want it in. Oh darling, get me drunk and make me feel it's not my fault, I'm not to blame. These ain't my sins, I broke my chains. There's more to do and I still want to live.
I feel your breath upon my neck, a soft caress as cold as death. I feel your heart beat in my soul. Our futures bound, our bodies know. Your blood like wine, I want it in. Oh darling, get me drunk, invite me. It's not my fault, I'm not to blame. These ain't my sins, I broke my chains. There's more to do if I can only leave. It's not my fault, I'm not to blame. These ain't my sins, I broke my chains. There's more to do if I can only leave. It's not my fault.